On June 5th, voters in my swing state were asked to decide if they wanted elected officials who measure success by how many people are dependent on the government, or if they wanted leaders who believe success is measured by how many people are not dependent on the government because they control their own destiny in the private sector. On June 5th, voters in Wisconsin got to determine who was in charge. Was it the big government special interest in Washington or the hard-working taxpayers of our state? The good news is that on June 5th, the hard-working taxpayers won.
That was Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker last week at the Republican convention, touting his recent recall victory as a referendum on collective bargaining and union rights, as well as also union influence. Now, while many can certainly debate his conclusions and the framing of the role of organized labor that he put forward, it is inarguable to note that the national decline of the influence of unions, and discuss how the Midwestern showdown and this trend plays closer to home, well, I decided to sit down with two longtime New York lawmakers from very different perspectives on the issue and different sides of the aisle. I'm now joined by two men from two very different political perspectives, but both know all too well about the challenges of making the dollars and cents add up today, while at the same time balancing the demands with 21st century political reality. Former Democratic State Assemblyman and RFL political contributor Richard Brodsky, and former Republican New York State Assemblyman and gubernatorial candidate John Faso. John, Richard, both thank you very much for a couple minutes. I appreciate it.
Nice to be
here. We have obviously unanimity. What happened 100 years ago was terrible, but then we put it in today's day and age, and Richard, I'll start with you. Unions certainly were critical at a time when they were in place to ensure workers had equal rights, or at least fair rights, worker safety, etc. But in the 21st century, if not they outlived their usefulness, have in many ways they made it unsustainable on a state level here to try and keep the financial houses in order.
Absolutely not. The notion that you blame the unions and people making $30,000 and $40,000 and $50,000 a year for the economic collapse caused by Wall Street is one of those political fictions that we've got to deal with. The unions created the American middle class. And as pressures on the American middle class increase, and we see it decreasing, that's because the labor movement is weaker. Now, there are abuses. We're in an economic crisis. Everybody has to contribute to the downsizing of government expenditures. There are some realities and horror stories that we have to deal with. But the fundamental issue, should the people of the state have the right to organize, and if they can't strike, as they can't in the public sector, should they be somehow protected, that we have to maintain our principles on.
John, you obviously saw what's happening in Wisconsin right now, and many asked, should Wisconsin happen in New York? What would your answer be to that question?
Well, I think that each state is different. Each state has different issues and laws and history. But I would argue that collective bargaining in New York needs to be reformed, not thrown out. But there are some common sense, practical things that we can do to lower costs for local government, for school districts, and for state government. And most importantly, for taxpayers, because what's happening, and the census just came out this week, we're losing 2 more congressional seats. New York is going to have 27 seats in the House of Representatives, the lowest number in 200 years. And something is happening in New York. And what's happening is people are voting with their feet. They're running for the exits. We know the difficulties in places like Westchester County with property taxes. And the issue is, how do you make government more affordable? And how do you make it so that people can afford to stay in this state and business can prosper?
You know, though, the counter, John, which is going to say, wait a second, we've never seen, at least in recent American history, a bigger gap between have and have-nots now. Why is it that the middle class, those really that we're talking about, a lot of these jobs on the state level that would have to say some belt tightening here, why are they going to have their belts tightened when, for example, a millionaire's tax is all but off the table in the state of New York? It seems for a lot of people on the blue-collar end, they're being asked to give more when the white-collar isn't.
Well, I think the class warfare argument is way overstated. In fact, if you look and that's not the point of my argument here today, but I would simply point out some of the specific examples of how the laws, the way they're set up in New York, tilt the bargaining very much in favor of public employee unions against taxpayers. Here in Westchester County, virtually all the county workers don't pay anything for health insurance.
I'll ask you to respond to that. And also, when you said there, hey, listen, we got to have some reforms here, do you think they're on the margin or the main? Because, for example, using Westchester County, a recent story you saw, I'm sure, Richard, would show just in the Yonkers Police Department alone, you got 100 retired cops who are making more money in retirement than they did when they were working full time.
Those things are not going to survive. They're not acceptable. But John is very skilled at arguing by bad example, when what's really at stake is how you treat the bulk of the people who aren't abusing the system. Look, we are in an economic crisis not caused by middle-class people, not caused by government workers. The remedy that Wall Street brings to this is let's reduce the benefits and salaries of people making, on average, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. Everybody's got to tighten their belt. There's nobody who should be exempt from this. But the fact remains that the average salary and the average benefits received by public employees is not grotesque, not out of scale with what we want to pay people. What is a problem are the abuses. If we wipe out the abuses, you can maintain public employment, public services, and reasonable tax levels.
You see, everyone, this is why I like this, because for once I get to shut up and I let to have other people have a good argument while I just sit here and play traffic cop. For everyone here at RFL, thank you so much for joining us for this special rebroadcast. And a reminder, tomorrow night I will be coming to you live from Charlotte, North Carolina, host city of the Democratic Convention. And after the break, we're going to have all your news headlines. Hope you enjoyed your Labor Day.